And good Monday morning to you here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I imagine it is a good Monday morning to you because I imagine you had a good weekend or at least a good Sunday night on account of the fact that your Pitt Panthers are dancing. After all the time we spent going back and forth about it, after all the time we spent talking about whether they would or whether they wouldn't make it, talking about the bubble, talking about playing games, talking about this seed or that seed or how they moved up or how they moved down in net rankings and quad wins and all these different things, I'm glad to be done with all those conversations because Pitt's in the NCAA Tournament for the first time in 7 years. The Panthers are dancing, and that gives us something fun to talk about here on the Morning Pitt. After a decent stretch there where we didn't always have a lot of fun things to talk about, so much so that last Friday I just had to talk about 10 good things about Pitt basketball. I didn't quite stretch it out to 20, but I talked about 10 good things about Pitt hoops. It's nice to add another one here, number 11, or maybe it slots in at number 1, depending on how you view it. But in this season full of breaking streaks and ending long stretches of mediocrity and losing basketball, a lot of things that stretch back to that 2015-16 season. A lot of times where we've said, well, it's been 7 years since, or they just did that for the first time in 7 years. We can add a new one, and arguably the biggest one. They're back in the NCAA Tournament for the first time in 7 years. You know the deal here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We always ask you to do the same things. Like the video. The like button's down there. You can see it's a little thumbs up. Click that thing. And then, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you'll never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. We've got videos up from yesterday. Jeff Capel, a handful of Pitt players talking about being selected to the NCAA Tournament. That's right there. We'll have these Morning Pitt videos every day, Monday through Friday. Tomorrow we're going to have some Pitt basketball to talk. We'll have Pitt football to talk because spring camp starts tomorrow morning, so we've got that as well. There's a lot of video content. We'll have Pat Narduzzi video and players, Pitt players. That'll all be right there at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So you want to make sure you don't miss any of it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on your notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone whenever we go post new content, and also when we go live, because we will be live after the game tomorrow night. It's going to be a late one. Drink your coffee. Never mind the time change a couple days ago. This is going to be a late night tomorrow night. 9 o'clock tip-off in Dayton for Pitt against Mississippi State. We'll talk about that game in just a second. But it's going to be a late one. We're still going to be live. We'll have a live Panther-Lair postgame show right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Game tentatively scheduled for like a 9-10 tip-off. If they hold to that, I'm guessing we would be live around, I would say no later than 11:30. But I can't guarantee an exact time. So if you want to make sure you don't miss the live show, click the subscribe button and turn on your notifications. You can get alerts sent to your phone every time we go live, so you don't miss anything we do. I'm sure win or lose tomorrow night, the live show is going to be, the live postgame show is going to be pretty interesting, pretty fun. We'll have a good time with it. So make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you won't miss anything at all. All right, so Pitt, Mississippi State, it's the 11 seed playing game in Dayton. It's the second one of the night following the Southeast Missouri State, Texas A&M Corpus Christi game. That's actually a 16 seed play-in game. The other 11 seed play-in game will be on Wednesday, Nevada versus Arizona State. That's the late game in Dayton as well. You know, this outcome being put into one of the play-in games, I think most Pitt fans had accepted this as a real possibility. And even got to a certain point, I think, in the last probably 24, 48 hours where the consensus became not just, oh, that would be okay to be in a play-in game. It became, well, at least they're in. If they make a play-in game, at least they're in. And I think you can certainly start there when you talk about this situation. You know, I got into it last week a few different times talking about Pitt and their predicament with being presumably on the bubble, or maybe being back and forth, or maybe they're in, maybe they're not. I said, you really allowed too much room for doubt on two specific occasions. When you lost to Florida State, when you lost to Notre Dame. Those were the two games that ultimately put you in the bubble. Part of the problem was in the month of February, you didn't have any opportunities to get a good win to offset those bad losses. Part of the problem is that when you had an opportunity then, in early March, when you went to Miami, you didn't capitalize. And then in the final game you played, the most recent game, the thing that's lingering in people's minds the most is you got destroyed by Duke in the ACC tournament. And so they had these bad losses, not a lot of opportunities to offset those bad losses with good wins. And then when you did have an opportunity, you fell short by 2 points on the road and you got crushed in the ACC tournament. And so Pitt put themselves in this position to be, are they in, are they not, to be on the bubble and ultimately to end up in a play-in game, take care of business against Florida State, take care of business against Notre Dame. And you are probably a 10 seed or a 9 seed or something like that. And you're not playing in the first 4 games. You're not playing in Dayton. You're jumping right into the NCAA tournament as a lock, as one of the field of 64 as opposed to the 68. But here you are. This is the situation that they created for themselves, and they made their bed, and now they're going to go to Dayton and have to earn their way into the NCAA tournament field proper. Now, I say it that way, but the reality is they're in the NCAA. They broke the 7 years or 6 years of not making the NCAA tournament. They made the NCAA tournament. They're going to count this as an NCAA tournament appearance, win or lose. It would certainly be very disappointing to lose in the first 4 games, but that still counts as being part of the NCAA tournament. And I have to say that one of my first reactions on seeing the news that Pitt was officially in, one of my first reactions was, thank God we can stop having this conversation about whether this season was a success or a disappointment. Because all the times that we talked about that last week, I constantly couched it in that as, the season could be, if they miss the NCAA tournament, after putting themselves in the position they were, if they miss the NCAA tournament, it's a disappointment. There's no question about it, but it doesn't undo the success of the season. It could be a success and a disappointment. And you can have both thoughts at the same time. And I mean, that was true. It was true then. It's true now. But now they made the NCAA tournament. So we don't have to have that conversation about whether or not it's a success or a disappointment. Now we can move the goalposts and say, well, if they get bounced in a first 4 game after putting themselves where they were, mid-February, that would be a huge disappointment. And it would. And the season would still be a success. We're getting over 20 wins, setting a conference or a program record for ACC wins, for making the NCAA tournament again. All of those things would be a huge success, even if they were to get bounced tomorrow night by Mississippi State in the first 4 game. I don't think they're going to get bounced by Mississippi State in the first 4 game tomorrow night. Now, anything can happen. I mean, like I said, we've seen this team lose to Florida State. We've seen them lose to Notre Dame. They've lost to teams that those are 2 teams they shouldn't have lost to. Quite frankly, they really should have won the VCU game and maybe the Vanderbilt game too, but let's not stretch our memories back too far. They can lose to anybody, but I think this sets up pretty well for them, actually. I think Mississippi State, with who they are, I think it's a game Pitt can win, and I would even go into it saying they probably should win. Sort of like everybody else, I did a quick crash course on Mississippi State last night, just sort of trying to figure out who the Bulldogs are. And, you learn about Tolu Smith, their big man, who's their leading guy. He averages 15, 16 points per game and, 6 rebounds or something like that. He's big. 6'11", I think Mississippi State website lists him at 245 pounds. There's obviously a size difference, a weight difference there with Federico. But he's not a stretch 5. He's not one of these big guys like a Filipowski or somebody from Notre Dame who's going to step out and shoot threes. And so you're not going to have that threat and that challenge for Federico. You're going to have challenges. There's no question. You're going to have the size and the strength, which is going to give Federico everything he can handle. But you're not going to have that extra challenge of having to defend out there. Now, you're still going to run into the problems depending on if you have Federico hedging a lot. I mean, they look to get the ball to Tolu Smith. I mean, he's their guy. And so Federico's hedging 5 feet away from the 3-point line. And he's trying to recover to get back to Smith. They might end up with some easy baskets that way. It'll be interesting to see how Jeff Capel adjusts the way he defends with the ball screens. Particularly with Federico. I don't know if we've seen, there have been little adjustments here and there, but it'll be interesting to see on a team where that really is the main threat is Smith. It'll be interesting to see how Pitt chooses to defend him. At the other end, Mississippi State is pretty well regarded for its defense. It seems like they're better defensively than they are offensively. Everyone is certainly taking note of the fact that they are by the numbers, the worst 3-point shooting team in the country. So that would seem to be a good thing. This, Pitt team struggles to defend on the perimeter. So if you have a team that's not particularly good at shooting threes, that should benefit you. Now, certainly we've seen teams and players that are not good at shooting threes end up shooting really well from three against Pitt on account of their defense. But this is a team that has not shot the three well at all through 30-plus games this season. It should not be a game where you get shot out of the building. You know what I mean? Where you lose because the other team is making a lot of threes. So that, I think, is good for Pitt. But their strength appears to be on defense. They're highly rated in their defensive efficiency, which, I mean, that's going to be a challenge. Pitt is a team that's clearly built on offense. I think, you look at Jamarius Burton being on the screen right now. You look at Nelly Cummings being on the screen right now. And I consider Tolu Smith, who's got that size at 6'11", but he's only got something like 30 blocks on the season. So he's not a huge, rim protector. Even on the scale of a Federico, it's not. I don't think it's going to be the same kind of challenge as it was with Duke, where there was so much size inside that when Burton tried to drive in or Cummings tried to drive in, I mean there was just nowhere to go. You couldn't get a shot off. When you think about the shots that Jamarius Burton likes to take, if you have size, they're really tough shots to get off. The mid-range jumper, the floater, the roller, all those different things that he likes to do when he drives inside the arc, it's really tough to do against a team like Duke. I don't know that Mississippi State is going to provide that same level of challenge. Now, they're a very good offensive rebounding team, so that's something you're going to have to keep an eye on. That's been an issue for this Pitt team all season. Teams that are just okay at offensive rebounding and end up doing really well against Pitt, and teams that are good at offensive rebounding can turn the game, like Miami did in the season finale. And so that's an area where Pitt's going to have to. I mean, they've got to be good on the defensive rebounds, particularly because of the pace that Mississippi State tends to play with. I mean, they slow the game down. So whatever you can do to get the ball and run is obviously good. I mean, you can't give them, 75, 80 seconds of possession at a time because they get 2 offensive rebounds. You've got to work the defensive glass and improve in that area over what we've seen out of the last few games. I mean, certainly the Miami game in the regular season finale, and then Duke, who didn't miss much, but when they missed, they often got the offensive rebound and put it back up for, a basket. And so, I mean, the key areas remain the key areas for Pitt. I think Mississippi State might be a bit more vulnerable to some of the things that Pitt wants to do than Duke was. But ultimately, Pitt's got its game, and they have to play their game. And that's, Burton and Cummings and Sabandi trying to drive. It's Elliott and Hinson and Cummings and Sabandi knocking down shots from outside. And it's occasionally what they did, I think, you saw it a little bit in the ACC tournament, trying to get Federico involved offensively. I think that was the case, was the Georgia Tech game. He scored early. Try and work what you can there, partially because I think there are buckets to be had. I think you can get points out of Federico if you execute some of those pick and rolls well. And then also, if you get him going inside a little bit, maybe you can pick up a couple fouls on Tolu Smith, and then you take their best player out of the game, potentially, for a few stretches. So I think there's a lot of upside in trying to work the ball inside there. But, overall, I mean, I don't hate this matchup. I think it's a pretty, I don't want to say favorable matchup for Pitt because, Pitt, like every other team, has its flaws, but I think this is a matchup Pitt can absolutely win. And even looking ahead, if they were to win this game tomorrow night, they would then play on Friday in Greensboro, of all places. I think it's set for a 3:10 tip-off against the 6th seed, which is Iowa State. And you look at Iowa State, and again, it's not a terrible matchup. I mean, it's a very much a winnable game. This team can win a couple games. And then I think what would they probably end up against Xavier after that? I think is where what it would look like down the stretch. And I haven't even looked that far ahead to the game that might be on Sunday. But I think just when you look at Mississippi State and Iowa State, they're winnable games. I mean, the opportunity is very much there for Pitt to at least get into the second round, which would be the game after Iowa State, which would be the Sunday game. Remember, this is a first four, and then you have a first round, and then you have the second round. If you can get out of the second round, you're in the Sweet 16. I think it's very possible, to see a path where Pitt is playing on Sunday. Which, hey, if you can win one or two, things can get really interesting. So that's the draw, and that's where they're at. I'll tell you something else. Is I was sort of, again, doing crash course primer on Mississippi State, and then even glancing a little bit ahead at Iowa State, what's the brief overview? What's the Cliff Notes version here? And it's interesting reading some of the resumes of these other teams that made it. You know what I mean? Mississippi State is a potential 11 seed. They're playing Pitt for the right to be the 11 seed in that region. Iowa State is the 6 seed. They both had like major swoons. I think Iowa State had a stretch where they went like 5-10, like over a 15-game stretch, like half the season. This chunk that represented half the season, they went 5-10. Mississippi State had something similar where I think they went 1-8 over a 9-game stretch. Pitt never really had that big swoon. They had some swoons. I think you would even say the Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, or no, not Notre Dame, but the Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech back-to-back that was in maybe even into the first half of the Syracuse game. You could say there was a bit of a lag there. They lost to Virginia Tech. They didn't play great against Georgia Tech, even though they ultimately pulled that game out for a win. So even in their swoon, it's not like they lost 5 or 6 in a row. And it's not like they lost 8 out of 9 or 10 out of 15. They lost 1, and they finished the season losing 3 out of their final 4. That's rough. That's a tough way to go out, but it's not going 5-10 over 15 games. Their worst stretch of the season was in the first 4 games of the season when they started 1-3. They've been pretty good at not letting that snowball since then. And they've only, they lost those 3, right? The West Virginia, Michigan, VCU games. They, in terms of back-to-back losses, it was Clemson and Duke after that. They lost those 2 back-to-back, and then they lost Notre Dame and Miami back-to-back. So only really 3 stretches where they had back-to-back losses, and only one of those where it stretched out to 3. The other 2 times, they only just lost 2 in a row and moved on. This Pitt team has not had that big dip like Mississippi State had and like Iowa State had. And I'm just picking these 2 teams because they, like I say, they're the potential path for Pitt. And as I was reading about them, I'm reading about these big, these stretches they went through, significant stretches, 9 games, 15 games. And I'm saying, it just sort of struck me that Pitt didn't really have that. They were able to pull themselves out of it pretty regularly and not let it snowball. And sometimes they bounce back against a bad opponent, and sometimes they bounce back against a good opponent, but they tended to bounce back. I think there was a lot of what's the word? Curiosity doesn't seem stark enough or dire enough, but I think there was a lot of interest in seeing how they would bounce back from the Notre Dame Miami back-to-back losses, going into the ACC tournament, where not only they had lost 2 games in a row, but they also had fallen from 1st place to 5th place. I mean, tied for 3rd, but the number 5 seed, they went from the number 1 seed to the number 5 seed in the span of a week, and really felt like something slipped through their fingers. It was, I think there was a lot of interest to see, well, how are they going to handle this? How are they going to respond? And they went to the ACC tournament and played a tough, good, solid game against Georgia Tech to advance to the quarterfinals. Where, of course, they got dismantled by Duke. But, this team will have a little extra time off. They play that game on Thursday. They don't play again until Tuesday. That's a longer break, I think, than they typically get. And I think they'll come out and be ready to, not be one and done in this tournament. And I think they've got a great chance not to be one and done. I think they've got a great chance to win tomorrow night, advance to Friday, and maybe even play themselves into a game on Sunday. So, one way or the other, they're dancing again. one way or the other, we can all stop talking about how much of a disappointment it would be if they missed the tournament, because they didn't miss. And we don't have to talk about the net anymore. We don't have to talk about quad wins anymore. And we don't have to talk about the bubble anymore. We don't have to talk about any of those things. We can just talk about the matchups. We can talk about our brackets, and we can have a lot of fun with that. We'll have a bracket challenge, of course, on Panther-Lair.com, so you make sure to join us there and make your picks and show how smart you are and how you're smarter than all the rest of us. We'll all attempt to do the same thing for sure. I got to tell you, I mean, before we go, I haven't broken all the brackets down. I haven't filled out a single bracket yet. I'll do some of that today and tomorrow. I like Duke, man. I really like Duke. And granted, watch the game on Thursday very closely as they destroyed Pitt. But they are just humming along, playing really, really well with some really talented guys. Really talented guys who seem to be figuring it out. And they've got it going right now. And I would not be surprised to see that team go on a run to the Elite Eight or the Final Four or the National Championship game. I think they are that good. And we'll see what the draw looks like. I think they have to beat Purdue, I think. Are they in Purdue's region? And so that's not going to be easy, but they're really, really good. So I don't want to give all my picks away too soon, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have Duke going pretty far in the NCAA tournament brackets. But we'll figure all that out as we go. The tip-off time is set, though. It's 9:10 p.m. tomorrow night. It's on True TV. This is that time of year where we all try and remember where and what True TV is, but we'll figure it out, and we'll all keep making jokes about it for sure. But 9:10 p.m. tomorrow night, Dayton, Ohio, Pitt, Mississippi State for the right to be the number 11 seed and face number 6 seed Iowa State. It's March Madness. Pitt's back in it, and I can't wait. Start the clock. Depending on when you're watching this, it might be 36 hours or less, 38 hours or less until the game starts. Looking forward to it. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in today and checking out the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt. It's been a lot of fun catching up with you. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope you have a great Monday. We're all just counting down till Tuesday night. But between now and then, we'll be back tomorrow with another Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.